Hello and welcome to today's video episode podcast thing. Still haven't decided what this fully is, but we're back. We're back with your boy Rowan, and we are back in our rooms, as most people are nowadays, on a computer screen. So that's how it is. That is the modern world. So obviously the last kind of podcast thing was a Q&A. So we answered some of your questions about nutrition, dieting, gaining weight, bulking, all things to do with kind of nutrition and fitness. And this episode is going to be a little bit more about training and the training side of moving into a gaining phase or a bulk or whatever you want to call it. The quest for hypertrophy, some might say. That sounds a little bit more a little bit more
elusive quest.
I might just put that on the top of all of my programs now. Just this is a quest for hypertrophy. Welcome aboard. Come along with me, Gandalf. Tangent. So we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of training side of things, how you could potentially do it for yourself, some take homes, and how you can apply it to your own training. Because arguably kind of volume and training is one big piece of growing muscle in a gaining phase, because if we just eat in a calorie surplus without the training stimulus, we're just going to get fat, as some of us have probably found out before. So before we start, before we start, kind of how are you, mate? Like, give us a little update on things. How's training? How's life up in Loughborough?
Yeah, it's all good, thank you. Still going through masters, obviously, so lectures, seminars, labs, etc. It's nice actually getting to go back in person, do things face to face again, and then at least training and my own least off season, growth season, going well. Food is still slowly ramping up. Composition isn't out of hand. Hopefully, it won't get through.
So, what's your body weight at the moment? What's body weight doing?
It was 92.2 kilos this morning. So I finally found a increase where weight is actually starting to go up. So I'm just shy of 4,000 calories now.
It's not bad.
And it's quite enjoyable. Still enjoying food, which is the main thing.
Yeah, preserve that appetite, as we talked about in the last podcast. If you haven't watched it, go and watch it now.
Oh God, yeah. It's getting to the stage that I'm adding a little bit of coconut oil to my rice. Not only is it extra calories, it tastes delicious.
So what are you doing with your macros? How are you splitting up the calories then? So what protein you want, what carbs you want, what fats?
So protein, so I aim for a little bit over probably 2.2 grams per kilo of body weight. So I aim for around 200 grams protein from proper sources, so at least complete sources. And then due to eating a vast quantity of rice, oats, etc., that bumps up my kind of trace, or at least total tracked protein, by at least another 40. So at least I'm on about 240 protein a day. Carbs range from 500 to 550, and then fats on training day is about 55 to 60, and close to 70, 75 on non-training days.
Nice, yeah. Well, you're well underway, aren't you? So your goal is 2023, right?
Yes, that is what I hope.
Rowan will be back on stage in 2023, so we'll hold him accountable to that on these podcasts.
Hopefully bigger.
Hopefully bigger. Well, yeah, hopefully bigger. We'll see. So a little update on me. So what am I now? 6 weeks post-show? Something like that. How am I feeling? Still, some days are a bit strange. Like I was just saying to Rowan before we kind of press record, legs are still struggling. I feel like my bones are not my bones anymore in my legs. But nonetheless, like, training is on the rise. Like, today's leg session was very good, albeit I'm absolutely ruined now. As you can probably tell from just not being able to move much. I'm very lethargic and static compared to the last podcast. But I think this is where I need to catch myself and be very aware of the intensity that I'm bringing to my sessions, because I've got a bit carried away in the session today, progressed numbers by like 15 kilograms and reps. and now I feel in the gutters, and probably tomorrow I'm going to be ruined. And then that'll mean probably a suboptimal session tomorrow, or potentially even kind of knocking on into kind of my next rotation, which is not what I want to do. Because I mean, like I said, like I'm in no real place to kind of be growing any muscle at this point in time. Just because calories aren't necessarily that high. I'd say I'm probably at a conservative maintenance. So body weight's on average at about 90.7. So that's only really like 4 kilograms up from my lowest weigh-in. Which is all right. Like I've got over the initial kind of stage of feeling like a zombie. I just think obviously at some point I need calories to go up, but obviously with my digestive issues that I've had post show, which I'm still having daily, I am struggling to kind of not kind of struggling, but it's kind of like there's a little bit of food anxiety there, because every time I eat, I get discomfort and kind of the kind of negative effects of IPS that they kind of think I've developed. So I'm just trying to keep that in check whilst progressing my body weight, but I'm kind of happy with how things are going. Like as long as I'm regaining strength, regaining performance, and there is a gentle upward trend, I'm relying on muscle memory to really sort me out, and just literally bring it all back before Christmas. If Santa's listening, that'll be the perfect thing. Just get muscle memory.
The gift of gains.
I've been good this year. Just get muscle memory on the back of your trolley. Not trolley, what is it? Sleigh.
Sleigh.
And come down my chimney and you can put it straight in the stocking. A little bit of muscle memory.
Slightly, yeah.
Probably wouldn't want to say that around children. Probably wouldn't want to say that around children, but that's fine. The whole thing's weird anyway. So we'll get into the main topic of the discussion today. So we're going to be talking about setting up your kind of growing season, growth phase, quest for hypertrophy, and what you need to do with your training and your training volume, more importantly, because it's a very kind of talked about topic at the moment. Like everyone's releasing podcasts on it. There seems to be very kind of almost militant camps that if you are part of one camp, you therefore cannot be part of the other camp. And it's interesting because our thought processes have changed. And I think like we're quite open-minded in the sense that we are quite aware of our own biases. And yes, it might take us a little bit of time to come round to a new idea, but if we're presented with evidence that suggests that it is logical and it's not just kind of some hippie drink warm lemon water and you'll lose weight or you'll grow muscle, we'll come round to it and we'll trial it for ourselves. And sometimes you don't know things until you try them for yourself. So that's what we're doing at the moment. Well, you're doing at the moment. I don't have that luxury, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So what would you be thinking about straight off the bat when you kind of program for someone transitioning, let's say just from either a maintenance phase or a light dieting phase? Let's not say contest prep, because that's a little bit extreme. And I don't think many people have been in that situation. If you have, I feel for you. But what would you kind of be thinking about straight off the bat?
So the first thing would probably be based off of some sort of needs analysis where you can see possibly where the person needs to put more focus into, or even just possibly through their biomechanics, do they have issues with movement patterns and stuff like that. So the first initial phase would probably be reassessing basic movements, because as we said again before we started recording, if you're not in a position to perform exercises well, or aren't able to connect with movements or things like that, just starting to increase load or trying to perform hard working sets of that movement, you're not really going to get the most benefit from it.
Yeah, I would totally agree. Like I would probably more often than not, if I have data on the client, or if I don't have data on the client, I would be collecting data and information about them through the assessment process. So you'd be assessing kind of, right, what do you normally do? Because obviously when people start, they want to get started, especially in the gaining phase. Like most people are like, I want to get jacked. So I would normally, for this kind of phase where we're going to be trying to gather as much information and feedback on the client, put them around baseline volume. And baseline volume kind of, let's just talk about volume first. So we're going to be talking about volume a lot in this kind of episode. So like volume basically means the amount of work that you are doing. This can be within a micro timescale or macro, or it can be anything in between. It's just basically somewhat the measurement of the work that you are doing. So in kind of an endurance sport, this could be kind of distance, this could be time. Whereas in more strength-based sports and performance-based sports, it tends to be more towards kind of reps and sets or total amount lifted. Depending on how kind of fancy you want to get with it. Obviously, if you're working out total amount lifted, you're going to be adding up a lot of numbers. That's basically like an accountancy lesson every check-in. Sometimes it's easier for a lot of Gen Pop to kind of see their sets and their reps and see that as their volume, because they can see that that is potentially going up and down, and they can just see that as their volume. And what we mean by baseline volume is kind of each individual have an amount of volume that they'll just need to kind of remain the same, to tick things over. And the reason I'd put a client on this initially would be to, like Rowan said, like we're not necessarily looking to just start growing muscle when we know nothing about how they perform things, how they move. And like you said about that needs analysis kind of approach, that's a very good way of looking at physique development, because we're thinking about where do they need to improve. Likewise, are they ready to improve yet? Because if they're not, that's absolutely fine, but we need to do things and put things in place to make sure that they can be in maybe 6 weeks' time. And it's not necessarily a step backwards, but it's a way of kind of making sure that when you can flip the switch and apply that volume, that it's actually going to be put to use, as opposed to just throwing volume at the client and hoping it sticks, which is very often the case. Like most generic, terrible PT programs are 3x10. And that is the throwing shit at a wall and hoping it sticks. Because, right, Janet, who's a single mom who just wants to be able to like play with her children, 3x10 deadlift, brilliant. She doesn't need to do 3 sets of 10. Like she can't even do a deadlift. So why are you programming that? So that's where kind of the needs analysis would really help with that. And if we put people on baseline volume, we can then monitor and see what's happening, because some people might respond to baseline volume and then they don't need to do any more. And then you might know that, right, what I thought was baseline volume isn't actually baseline volume. Are you still there? So when would you be looking to kind of drive up?
I'm hoping so.
You're quite lagged behind, but I'll let you on.
Oh God. Oh, thank you. Yeah, blame my university Wi-Fi.
Poverty. So what would you be looking to do after the kind of needs analysis? So would you agree that you'd put someone on kind of baseline volume, or would you be looking at kind of driving that up straight away?
So I'd look to do a period on baseline volume, I think. So you need to be able to assess what can they tolerate initially to even just recover from. Because again, putting Janet on 20 sets per muscle group 3 times a week, I don't think she's going to be walking out the gym by the end of that week.
And then her adherence, then she won't come back. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's down to assessing how much work can they tolerate without kind of not being able to recover from that. And then once you've worked out what movements they like, what can they do, what are their goals, you can then slowly at least begin to increase the amount of maybe sets or some sort of volume measure until they start kind of having some sort of progress. Then that's the other interesting topic, is how do you then measure that form of progression, or when it is ready to progress? Do you So at least myself, I ran a top set and back off scheme for maybe 2 years, where I didn't increase the amount of sets I performed. All I did was, once I hit the upper end of each rep range, I increased the load, started down towards the bottom, worked my way back up. And that was my only form of changing in volume.
So that's like a
And
very basic double progression method. And like some of my clients will be on that still. And I think the premise for that is that like we have to guarantee that that client or person or individual has a level of intensity that warrants that approach. And then because obviously like you're training quite hard, like you're training with a decent, if not a very close proximity to failure. And that's a skill in itself. So you've got to be able to match that skill with the approach you take in terms of your volume. Because obviously you've progressed quite a lot, and I've followed that approach as well. And it does mean that you have to train with a really high level of intensity, because it's basically forcing linear progression until you feel like your biofeedback's in the red, then you deload and you go again. So it's very aggressive. There's no kind of let up. And in terms of what that takes away from you, like it's an increased recovery demand. It's an increased kind of mental demand. Like I know in my kind of peak off-season gaining phase, like everything was heavy, like and it felt stressful going into the gym, because I was like, oh man, I got deadlifts today. Like all day that would be looming over me, and it's a lot of weight to pick up for a couple reps. Like, and it does kind of get on your mind. And I know you've started to transition over to a different approach, which we might talk on in a minute. But I'd just like to say the kind of top set or lower volume approach, like I said, is dictated by your ability to get to within a proximity of failure. If you don't necessarily have that skill yet, or you haven't acquired that skill, you need to go through a phase or at least multiple blocks where you develop that skill acquisition, because your ability to go to failure will be very much dictated, I feel, by your training age. Just your time doing movements and your confidence doing those movements, because it's not comfortable going really close to failure. Like your body is telling you not really not to do it, especially on some of the machines we have at our kind of disposal nowadays, where we're changing the mechanics of which we can move, because we've got stability, we've got kind of different angles that we're working from. Everything in our body is telling us to stop now. So until you've developed that kind of skill to just ignore your feelings, there's probably a decent scope for going at a more high volume approach. And this is something that I use a lot with kind of more kind of quote unquote gen pop clients who don't want to be kind of screaming, yeah, buddy, and just like slapping chalk everywhere. Do you know what I mean? Because you've got to take into account the client psychology. It's massive. Like not everyone is like Ronnie Coleman or like us and just wants to go in and like scream at each other and just drinks protein shakes. Like some people aren't just made like that. So for them to get the same amount of kind of total volume or actual stimulus within the muscle, you might be looking at a higher volume approach, because one, their accuracy within the set might be lower, because arguably as you get, if you progress your training age, your accuracy within your movements gets better. Your internal connection with what you're doing gets way better. I know this for a fact with myself personally. Like when I first started, I could do like 4 sets of 10 of squat and not get a quad pump. Whereas now I'll do 1 set of squats if I ever do them. If I could do them, I'm too close. If I could do them, I would feel that in my quads straight away, because I know now how to manipulate my mechanics. I can drive that internal stimulus. And I've just been able to develop that ability to connect with what I'm doing more efficiently over time. So that will also play into the amount of volume that you'll kind of apply to a client, because sometimes you'll need to give them, not throw volume at them and hope it sticks, but give them more volume, knowing that some of it will stick, because their accuracy might be off. So they might do 1 rep at the start and it's like a quarter squat. So then in the next rep, they'll do a better squat. So right now we're improving, but we need more total volume because we're getting a few more kind of inconsistencies in their performance, which I think is like quite a valuable thing to be able to do from a coaching standpoint, because I did go through a period of like giving everyone a top set and a back off. I must admit, just because I thought
I've done the same.
And I do think there's some merit in, obviously, I know lots of people talk about this, like individuals understanding what it's like to push to failure. But again, it's a skill in itself. And no one can just do that off the bat unless you're kind of coming from a very sporting background. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, I actually think using failure, especially for beginners, is quite an easy tool.
Very true.
For testing kind of their measure of intensity, or even just setting an initial ability of how many reps they can perform. Like if you say, do this way, aim for between 10 and 15, stop until you don't think you can get any more. If they get 13 reps, you can say, okay, next session, you're just going to aim for 14. It doesn't take into account then, say it was us and that 13 reps was we couldn't have gotten 14. Whereas most potential beginners, they could have probably gotten another 5 or 6 reps if they pushed harder.
Yeah.
So you can use that easy model of progression again. So even if you just say you're going to perform 3 sets, aim between 10 and 15 reps, stop until you think you've got 1 more rep left, you can then say from whatever they did perform, okay, just aim for 1 more rep per set in the following week. And then after a few weeks or rotations of doing that, they may then understand slightly more about, actually, no, I think I can push harder than that, or I am able to lift a little bit more than that.
Exactly. Because like it's interesting because like we talk about failure and we talk about things, but like these terms aren't defined, because your failure, well, they're defined subjective to the individual. Like my failure is not the same as Janice's failure, like you just said, like, and that puts a spanner in the works. But like you said, if we say like go to failure, perceived failure, we can then develop, or we can build on that perception or improve that perception in a way over time. So like when I was younger, my perceived failure was, oh, this is a bit tiring now, I'm just going to stop. Whereas now it's like, will I get crushed? So it's something that needs to kind of be developed and understood when you go into a gaining phase. So, right, we've set them up, we've done a needs analysis, we've put them on baseline volume. If you were looking for someone wants to, right, let's say a generic lad, for example, wants to grow their arms, their shoulders, their chest. What are you thinking? What considerations are you taking after the needs analysis to make sure that we are getting the most out of this gaining phase for those body parts?
So I'd find out obviously how many times a week they're able to train, and then based off of that, look at how much frequency we can then use to work each muscle group. Because yes, it went through a trend of showing training with a higher frequency per week or per kind of shorter set period of time appeared more beneficial for muscle growth. There was a paper fairly recently that showed no difference between once a week and multiple times. I've not read it yet.
Is that based on volume being equated?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So basically, if you do all of your volume, all of your work in one session in the week, it gives you the same benefit, or could potentially give you the same benefit as if you split that into 2 or 3 per week. Where I think there's potential merit in, actually, I'll let you carry on, sorry.
Well, to be fair, I was just going to say, while I think that may offer advice of just showing that you can do anything and probably grow somehow, I do think there is more merit to splitting up volume across a week, just because generally you'll have more energy.
The quality of the sessions, yeah.
Exactly. if you have to perform less volume or less total sets in one session, it's much easier to put a little bit more effort into those 5 sets and then do it again 4 or 5 days later versus have to pour everything into that one session. Because definitely by the end,
The
the last
quality is going to
exercise
be
will
right
suffer.
down. Yeah. Yeah. And I think like if we were looking to try and grow arms, delts, chest, that top line that kind of lads look for, initially I would just be looking for them to get stronger at pretty much all of the movements. Because I do think for a lot of people, getting stronger is always going to be the first point of call relative to whatever rep range they're in. If you're starting a mesocycle chest pressing the 30s and you come out at the end of the mesocycle chest pressing the 40s with good form, like you're going to have grown some tissue as long as your body weight's gone up. So there's always scope for getting stronger. However, it's normally when people are really strong that you'd be looking to kind of manipulate volume and or intensity to kind of drive that new novel stimulus. So I would always be saying to people kind of get stronger, apply that double progression like Rowan said, and keep volume as low as possible whilst progressing. Because you've got to remember, you don't really necessarily want to be doing high volume, because if you do more, you then just have to do more in the future. So
The
you
ceiling
always,
that you'll eventually
yeah, you
hit.
want the minimum effective dose always, because who doesn't want to, like everyone would want to do like one curl and just have massive arms. Like who wouldn't want to do that? But I know it's not the case. That's the most simplistic kind of analogy ever. But if you can get away with doing 2 sets, growing and getting stronger, it makes sense to just do those 2 sets and continue to do those 2 sets until you stall in your muscle growth, in your kind of weight gain, and in the physical kind of, in the visual feedback, sorry, that you kind of getting with from the check-in process. But then what would you be doing if kind of that double progression, that light's really doing my head in, that double progression method begins to stall?
So at least before I move on to that, I'll just say one of the main mechanisms of hypertrophy is mechanical tension.
Exactly.
Being able to perform a higher kind of workload, so be able to lift more for a slightly kind of greater like rep rate, number of reps, increase the amount of work you perform. In theory, that should then carry over to muscle growth. So if you're able to get stronger whilst then still lifting the same number of reps or sets, in theory, the amount of work you are doing is increasing.
Exactly. So you're not necessarily increasing your set and rep volume. Well, you might be increasing your rep volume, but you're increasing your total volume through kilograms lifted or pounds lifted. Like we said at the start, is one of the metrics of increasing volume. So that's where like the progressive overload, like you hear it all the time, like people making stuff on Instagram, progressive overload this, progressive overload that. It is that simple. Like if you are getting better over time, you will be, as long as it's kind of programmed towards hypertrophy, you'll be, as long as you're not like on a treadmill, just getting better and better. That was me in prep, just getting absolute cardio, just efficient. If you are getting better over time, like that's the aim of the game, and that is the most simple form of kind of growing muscle in that sense. But yeah, that's good. So what would you do then once something's stalling?
So that's when potentially changing. Using myself as a good example, using that top set back off method where each set was either to failure or at least 1 rep from failure. I've started to begin slowly increasing the number of sets performed within the session per week, then based off of feedback of how well I was able to recover from, mentally, how did I feel after the session, physically, was I able to actually get through the session okay. I'm looking to at least progress that every week to 2 weeks until I get to a stage that I'm overshooting and I can't recover from, then at least I'll bring volume back down to baseline. So it's then implementing some sort of intensifier technique, either through increasing volume or possibly trying to keep increasing weight. But then, as we've already said, that's when form may begin to break down.
Because if it was as simple for stronger guys as just adding weight every week, we would all be walking around as the world's strongest man or woman. Like that would just
be deadlifting 500.
Exactly. And the reality is, like, you hit a ceiling pretty quick, in the sense that it does stall. And then what do? Like, you have to keep creating that novel stimulus. And I think the approach that you're taking at the moment is quite an interesting way of doing it. And it kind of synthesizes the kind of higher volume approach and the low volume kind of what's the name, Dorian and JP approach. And I think, like, as with anything, it's always good to just sit somewhere in between. Like, don't just limit yourself to being kind of, right, I follow JP, so I can only do one set here. Like, or I follow kind of Revive Stronger, I can only do 6 sets, 2 RER -3. Like, it's going to give yourself, it's going to put you at a disadvantage. And I think, like, from the feedback that you're getting and from what I'm seeing from quite a few coaches at the moment, like, people are getting great results with it once, with that approach that you're suggesting, where you do increase volume when it seems right and it's auto-regulated. It's not necessarily just set in stone. Like, if Rowan was progressing, he wouldn't just then add in 2 sets or 1 set. He wouldn't need to, because, like we said, if he's just increasing volume for volume's sake, he's then next mesocycle or next macro cycle, he's going to have to do 3 more sets, and then he's going to be in the gym for like 5 hours. No one wants that. So again, it's so individual. You need to be thinking about how you're auto-regulating it for yourself, which is part of the skill, isn't it? And that's most of the time why people get a coach, so they don't have to think about this stuff. But yeah,
I do think as well.
Sorry.
I do think as well, as much as training to failure is a good skill to have, understanding proximity to that will help quite a lot in setting up a program, because you can make things harder by simply, if in week 1 you trained 3 reps from failure, week 2 you went to two reps from failure, maybe week 3 you added an additional set at still 2 reps from failure. If you start training balls to the wall for everything, it's so difficult to then increase that, because, as we said earlier, there were sessions when I was emphasizing that area much more, where I would perform a set and then be scared for that following week, where I knew I then had to beat it. I was like, if anything is off, I can't progress.
And that is something we haven't spoken about yet, is like, with that kind of, I don't want to say performance-driven approach to low volume, because everything should be dictated on performance, but with that kind of performance pressure of the top set back off lower volume approach, everything does need to be optimal or optimized. And for most people, for 99.9% of people, that can't always be the case. Like, you might have life happens. You might have a poor night's sleep because your neighbor's cat got stuck in the window. Like, you don't know. Like, we're not all robots, and there's a time and a place to be a robot. And you might find that you can be a robot for 3 months and get some really good linear progression. But you might then find that, kind of like you said, life happens, stress creeps in. And the minute external stress goes up, your ability to perform in these top sets goes down, because subconsciously throughout the day, you've expended more energy being stressed. Psychologically, you're more drained. So therefore, you don't have much kind of oomph to bring to that top set. Whereas if you were super relaxed all day and you've just been sat around, you'd have all that energy, you'd have all that bandwidth for that top set. So when you, like you said, when you get to that top end of your strength and your relative strength, like it becomes more of a multifaceted approach to training, even more so. Like that's where biofeedback becomes, and your abilities to control and impact things that influence that biofeedback become even more important. And this is where, again, like I said, stupid lie, good catch there. Like I said, this might not be the approach for everyone, because if you, I don't know, you're a banker in London, like, are you going to have the bandwidth to go in and do a top set back off and it be perfectly executed within like the best of your ability? Probably not. Whereas, are you probably better off going in and doing 3 sets? Sorry.
Yeah. Well, no, I was going to say, conversely to that, we're obviously talking about in the aspect of, is performance going to be able to increase if we keep telling them to progress and push harder, and then we're already noting that recovery aspects may be implicated. Are they going to be able to function in their day-to-day life? Are they going to be so ruined from us pushing them because they need to get the gains, that then they can't go out for food with other people because they have to be in bed, otherwise they're not recovered enough? Exactly. Are they able to even get their work and focus?
So there's like like with everything, there's levels to this. Like if you're a PT and this is your job, sweet, let's get optimal. You're going to bed, you've got your blue light blockers on, like you're going to bed at 9, you're taking your sleep supplements, you're waking up, you're measuring all of your stuff. Oh, look at this loser. I've got mine next door. You need to know where you sit within this kind of sliding scale of optimality, and optimality is not even a word, optimization, and then pick your approach, or let your coach decide your approach accordingly. Because like I said, it's not necessarily like an echo chamber where you just need to do like, I am JP, therefore I need to do 2 sets. When you're a dad who's got 2 kids, like you're up all night, you're working all day, you go to the gym at like 8, like you're in no position really, unless you've got a really good head screw on your shoulders, or probably got some psychological issues, to be doing like a really aggressive deadlift set. But we have touched on fatigue. So interesting one, fatigue. So I don't necessarily pre-plan deloads. And I don't do this for most of my clients, but I think obviously a whole gaining phase needs to be adequately managed in terms of fatigue. And this is something that is, thank God, has like got better over time, because when I first started, days off was just no. It was just train all the time, and if you took time off, you were wasting time. But with clients at the moment, I'm basing my deloads realistically on their performance and the biofeedback that I collect on them. So the main biofeedback I would be collecting that would impact my decision for a deload, or kind of a devolume week, which we'll touch on in a minute and talk about, would be their motivation, some subjective and qualitative feedback. So like, how are they in our consults? How are they sounding? Because you can get a lot from a client's voice. Like if you're like, oh, hi, like how's training this week? And they're like, oh yeah, it's fine. You can start to pick up, and that gives you a piece of the puzzle. And if you then look at their data and their sleep's been off, their readiness to train is like 2 out of 10. Their inter-session energy is 1 out of 10. We're starting to see some red flags in terms of, right, this person might be overshooting. And sometimes you can't just listen to a client, because if I was coaching Rowan, for example, I'd say, how are you? Are you tired? Do you need a deload? He'd be like, no, I'm good. Let's keep going. And that's where you, as a coach, you need to make an objective decision. Like, all of these red flags are telling me, right, this person is overreaching. And you need to decide based on the client, or you need to decide based on yourself. When do you need to catch yourself for that kind of deload? Because some people, myself included, react very well from a kind of overreaching and then dropping off the fatigue model. So that basically means that my performance goes up and then it starts to drop off because I'm overreaching. That would be my last week before the deload or devolume. Then I would devolume and deload or deload, whichever I'd approach, and then I'd drive that performance back up. So I actually kind of react well to that kind of super compensation effect, which some people do swear by. I know they do it a lot in kind of like athletics and stuff like that. But the main core factor here is that you do give yourself time to reduce fatigue. Whichever kind of way you put it, you need time to recover from the stimulus that you've applied, because you've been pushing yourself. Whichever approach you've been taking, kind of a low volume, high volume, you've accumulated fatigue in that phase. And then you need to drop off that fatigue, or else your progression is just going to stall. And we all know these people in the gym who kind of, they're always there, they're always bench pressing, and they're still bench pressing 100 because they've been doing it for 10 months. And that you ask them, like, have you had a day off for like a year? And they're just like, no days off. So yeah, do you want to talk about kind of a devolume week and a deload week, or do you want to take one and I'll take the other, just so everyone knows what we're talking about?
So at least I'll take deload, because at least devolume is something that I've personally not tried myself. So at least the deload week would either be through reducing, maybe if you're performing, I don't know, 10 sets per muscle group per week, you may strip that back a little bit down to maybe 6 to 8. But then if most sets were taken a close proximity to failure, you would then reduce the load you were using slightly by maybe 20% for each set, and then stop further away from failure. So you're not pushing yourself as hard, but you're still getting in some sort of stimulus, which at least the maintenance stimulus needed to maintain muscle is pretty low. So having that time of still going to the gym, getting in the motions, will then get you ready to be able to increase up again afterwards.
Yes. And I would also like to say, like, deload weeks should have time off completely in them. Like, you should have more, or at least a few scattered rest days in there, because I know I hate deloading. I honestly feel like still a bit of a bro in me still feels like it's a waste of time. Like, you're going in, whichever approach you take, you're going in, you're not doing what you know you can do, but you also know that it's good for you. So you're kind of just sat there a bit annoyed, kind of like, I want to be attacking this set, but I know I need to deload because I'm absolutely ruined. So I always have some time off. Like, I normally kind of adapt my split, or just stay on the same split, and then add in some rest days. In terms of a devolume week, it is very similar to a deload week. You'd just be looking to reduce total volume across the week, which is very similar to kind of the deload approach or the generic deload approach. And again, this is completely individual. Some of my clients like doing a set with the same load that they would do, but just going nowhere near failure, because obviously that is a devolume in itself. Albeit it's not a true kind of deload, but for some people, that gym is what they do. Like I said, like, if I tell some people to have a week off, they'll be the worst person. They won't enjoy their week, and their adherence will go completely. And there is also some merit, I think, in both approaches, in being able to keep movement patterns fresh, because especially in kind of new trainees, if you give someone like a week of not doing an exercise, or potentially longer than a week if they're really ruined, you will detrain, and you will start to kind of lose the groove that you've created with the movement. Everyone's done it where they've had a good run of something, they've either gone on holiday, or that's been like an unplanned deload, and they've come back to something and it feels off. Something's not the same as it was. And if we've had a good mesocycle, we want to keep the grooves greased. Like, we want to come back from that deload albeit a little bit reserved, which we'll talk about in a minute, but we'll want to come back flying. We won't want to have to go through a block of training where we're thinking about learning movements or patterns again, unless you're going onto a new program where there is new movements. But arguably, most movements will be somewhat the same. It will just be a different variation of them. You're probably still going to be doing an incline press of some sort, whether that's a barbell, dumbbell, or machine. Like, you're probably going to be doing that. So what we don't want is your ability to execute an incline press to get worse over the deload. And I think for new trainees, this is massive because they're still learning, and arguably they'll need to deload more than a trained trainee potentially, because they'll be worse at managing their volume, their recovery, most things really. So make sure you've got a deload in there. In terms of a time scale, it's hard to say. I'd say anywhere between 6 and above weeks, you'd be looking to deload. If you can eke it out, I would be saying, I always start questioning clients around the 7 to 8 mark. If they're anything more than that, I'm really kind of scrutinizing their data and thinking, like, are you lying to me here? Like, are you just reporting things that aren't true? Because if you're truly pushing yourself, 8 weeks is a long time to be getting linear progression, basically. Especially if, like Rowan said, like, he's adding in volume at the end of that 8 weeks. Like, you should be looking to be dropping off fatigue around the 8-week mark. But again, it's completely subjective, because I didn't deload for my whole of my contest prep because I didn't have the luxury of it. So it's completely context dependent, but I would always be, if you're just in a gaining phase, if you're in a quest for hypertrophy, I would always be looking to drop off that fatigue somewhere around the 8-week mark, depending on just your individual kind of needs. And again, that links back to needs analysis. Like, if you're a super highly stressed person and you're training at a low volume approach and you're doing that well, you might need to deload every 6 weeks or 7 weeks because you're just absolutely battering yourself. But if your progression is good, that's not a bad thing. Like, find the recipe that works for you and just keep doing it. Like, this is the thing.
I think that's definitely the main thing. It's, everything is so interpersonal, and
100%.
Yes, it's easy to hypothetically say, okay, every 6 weeks we're going to deload, but there will be times where after 4 weeks, you may be massively overshot somehow and you need that little bit of time to recover, or you get to the end of that 6-7 weeks and you're thinking, actually, no, I can still go one more week. Before then, as you kind of said, it would be at least advisable to get some sort of fatigue management period in, so at least then you can easily push up before running into issues and having to have that forced deload.
Exactly, yeah, because like the reason we're implementing a deload is we're trying to catch ourselves before we get into a bad place in terms of all biofeedback. Because what realistically happens is we go into the red, and then more often than not we'll get injured. And what we don't want in a long-term kind of, in a sport where we're rewarded for doing things in the long term, is an injury, because small injuries become bigger injuries, and then they only affect your ability to progress. So this is like basically a long-term strategy for progression, and we should always be thinking about it. So we've deloaded, we've devolumed, we've dropped off fatigue. What are we then doing? Like, how are you approaching, or how are you telling a client to approach their training after that deload?
So ideally, if they could probably restart themselves back to a similar place to where their first block was. So ideally, again, we're not getting them to train immediately straight back to failure. They could be a few reps from failure, they're back at their kind of maintenance volume or possibly just above, and they're in that primed position to start increasing either, again, weight lifted for the following session, the amount of sets that they then perform, and it's slowly then progressing, kind of implementing that form of progressive overload again throughout that block.
Yeah, exactly. I think like one thing people do need to be aware of is that, like, you might not come back from the deload and feel necessarily great straight away. and your performance might be a little bit lower than where you left it. And that can sometimes be a thing that impacts adherence for the use of deloads in the long run. But what you need to remember is you've dropped off fatigue, but you've also detrained a little bit. But if you can get back on that upward trend of performance, you'll soon overtake your performance from the first mesocycle. And that's the whole point of it, because then you can surpass it in however means you're doing that. So whether that's through more volume or just simple progressive overload, you're surpassing your performance that was in the last meso, and you're then lifting more total volume. You are progressively overloading. And that is the aim of the game. And then you just do that again, and you continue to progress. Sorry, bit of a stutter there, bit of a tick, like the person from Pop Idol. What was his name? That singer who had a stutter with Will Young, Gareth Gates.
That's the one. You look a little bit like him as well, to be fair.
I definitely don't. He had black hair. Okay. Yeah. Anyway,
but at least, so during that deload as well, there is coming out of it the kind of neurological adaptation of your ability to your brain to send signals to your muscles to contract. If you take a little bit of time where the stress placed upon that is decreased, that's another reason why when you get back to the gym, fresh off your deload, ready to hammer everything, and you don't feel like you have that same snap as before, it will take possibly a few sessions just to get that kind of connection going again. And then, like we said, that adaptation will occur and you'll be able to progress above where you were prior to the deload.
And the thing with the first week or first 2 weeks following a deload is you need to be reserved and you need to be patient, because we're not deloading you, or you're not deloading yourself to, in the first 1 or 2 weeks, dig yourself a recovery pit that you then need a deload in 3 weeks' time. Because arguably the progress you could make in 3 weeks' time is minimal compared to if you managed it, or we managed it for you appropriately, that training block is 7-8 weeks of progression as opposed to 3. Because what more often than happens, and I've been guilty of this before, and I know you have as well, because I've seen you train after a deload, is you go back, because you love training, you go straight back into kind of, let's do this, right, training mode. You're looking at your logbook, you're looking at your stats, and you're thinking, right, I need to be doing what I did a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And you go in and you go past failure, or you increase volume too much, and then you're in a recovery pit and you have overreached way too soon. And if you overshoot that too early in the mesocycle, you'll be on the back foot for the whole meso. And that's not a fun place to be in, really, because like I said, we want a long linear progression of performance so that the mesocycle is kind of successful as a whole. You need to look at it as like a longer term period as opposed to intra-session at the start of that meso following the deload, because it's so easy to get pulled into kind of, right, I'm back in the gym, I've had a week off, I'm raring to go. Your mind might be saying yes, but your body's telling you no. So you just need to listen. My mind's telling me no.
But my biceps.
Exactly. But my hack squat. You just need to think, you just need to be more reserved than you think. And I think how you transition out of a deload really will dictate how successful a mesocycle is. Because definitely, being on the back foot is not going to be good for anything, because the back foot means performance is compromised, recovery is optimized, everything is optimized, everything is compromised. Sorry, I'm choosing the wrong word now. You can tell it's nearly an hour. So yeah, how you manage that is very important, and don't kind of do yourself a disservice. Like, you've managed to have a week off the gym, which is hard enough. Don't then go in and just absolutely ruin yourself straight off the bat.
I think, yeah, I think from all of these points that we're bringing up, it's very easy to get then overwhelmed with, oh no, am I performing too many sets, not enough sets? Am I training too close to failure? Am I not training close enough to failure? There are so many ways to skin a cat. I think the goal is always to get the most out of doing the least. Because as we've said, this is a slow process. If you find that you're growing off of only having to do 5 sets per week, why would you then try and push it any further? Exactly. 5 sets, you're probably going to be able to recover from that okay. It's not going to impact the rest of your life. And you're in a quite nice position to then increase.
Exactly.
So
I think like that rounds up perfectly. And I think all the way through, like it's completely person dependent. Like there is not a one size fits all model for anything in this. And you really do need to spend time learning about yourself, learning about what works for you. And it's the same with kind of nutrition. It's the same with training. It's the same with recovery. It's all person dependent. And the much you can kind of understand about yourself, or your coach can collect data on you and then make informed decisions about what to do with your training and nutrition, the better and the more informed and the more kind of optimal your kind of progress will be. Because the worst thing to do is think, oh, this person does this, I'm going to do that. Because it might, the honest truth is it might not work for you. It's not specific enough to what you need. And that goes back and loops back to kind of the needs analysis that you do at the start of a training block. Like, what do you need? And therefore we'll reverse engineer this training block around what you actually need, as opposed to what you think you need because someone else is doing it. But yeah, I have thoroughly enjoyed.
I think there are too many sessions.
Sorry, carry on.
I was going to say, I think there are far too many available sessions on Instagram where you can quickly go on someone's page, see their chest workout, complete that for 1 week. The next week, go somewhere else, complete another session somewhere else.
Follow me on Instagram, save my workouts. But yeah,
too soon.
Yeah, I was just going to say I was going to wrap it up because I was thoroughly enjoyed this chat. Because we're coming up to an hour now, buddy. And that's the magic number. And obviously people don't want to listen to us for too long because we're just two meatheads. But thoroughly enjoyed the chat. We've talked all things gaining, training in as we go into a bulk. If we've missed anything out, I apologize. But there's a lot to talk about. And I think we have talked a lot. But if you've got this far and you've enjoyed the video, again, you can find Rowan and you can find me on our details in the description. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Let us know in the comments what you want us to do. Peace.
Thank you.
How do I stop recording?